Ready to get started? Perfect.
Yes.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Alyssa Welch. I am the program manager for the Midwest Climate Adaptation Science Center, CASC, and I'm part of the Midwest CASC Consortium staff hosted here at the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities. Thank you for joining us today for our installment of the monthly science seminar. Um, it is a gorgeous day in the Twin Cities here, and I hope it is by you too. Thanks to folks who are new joining us here and for return customers. We're excited to share some of our projects with you today, and we have asked Marissa Ahlering and Kimberly Hall from the Nature Conservancy to present on their project today. Before we get going, I would like to just say the presentation is being recorded. So know that if you need to step away, it is being recorded, and we will circulate that to the registrants after the presentation in the next week or so. Please also adjust your video settings accordingly and mute your microphones throughout the session. And if at any point you have questions, feel free to pop them into the Zoom chat. We will hold the questions until the end of the session when we do our moderated Q&A session. But again, if you've got any technical difficulties, please feel free to reach out as well. Sarah, next slide, please. Before we begin, we're going to do our standard intro about who and what the Midwest CASC is, as a reminder about the importance of our regional research projects and collaborations. The Midwest CASC is a partnership between the USGS and the consortium of institutions that you see here on the slide across the region, and we're hosted at University of Minnesota. We are part of a national network of regional CASCs, all working to produce science that seeks to inform resource management efforts and help fish, wildlife, water, land, and people adapt to a changing climate. We work on topics that are specific to our Midwest region, management challenges that are specific to our Midwest region. And we do that work in several primary ways, including conducting synthesis research on relevant regional priorities. We support a network of interns, graduate students, and postdocs. We support a broad network of USGS-funded climate adaptation projects and researchers, of which Marissa and Kim are some of those researchers. And we host capacity building workshops and an annual gathering of the Midwest CASC community, like the one that we are currently planning for the Twin Cities. Sarah, next slide, please. So that leads into our two announcements here today. Make sure you get these on your calendars. Save the date for our Summer Science Symposium, August 3rd through 6th. We are going to launch that registration very, very soon. So chances are, if you received the email inviting you to this event, you will also get the email inviting you to that event. Watch for that. Registration is free. And we're going to start that with a 2-day optional workshop and then have 2 days of our regular plenary and breakout session formats if you've attended before. And then also April 14th, we are going to launch, thank you, Sarah. We just launched the registration for that event. It's one of our innovation event speakers, Innovation and Adaptation about Managed Relocation. So check out more at the link Sarah just dropped in the chat. Thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to introduce our speakers for today. Thanks.
Thank you, Alyssa. So we have two introductions coming up. Marissa Ahlering has a passion for prairies and prairie conservation. She joined the Nature Conservancy in 2010 and currently serves as a science director for Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. She works with a team that broadly focuses on conservation and management of natural systems and the benefits they provide. Her work focuses on conservation issues such as the importance of plant diversity to other ecosystem functions, implementing adaptive management, and integrating climate adaptation strategies into TNC's biodiversity conservation work. We also have Kim Hall. Kim applies her background in conservation biology and landscape ecology to developing and implementing strategies for reducing risks to nature and people from climate change. In her current position as a climate change ecologist and project manager on our North America Science Team, Landfire Group, she focuses on developing and communicating data and tools for informing land protection and restoration decisions. I'm going to pass it off to, I think, Marissa for screen sharing.
Yes. Let me get my screen up here and then I will kick it off as well. This slide sharing. All right, can you see that okay? Excellent.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for that nice introduction and inviting us to speak for the seminar series today. We're super excited to share with you all the results of this project, which just wrapped up last month. So I'm just going to dive in. So I probably don't need to tell all of you this, but right, you got to start somewhere in a talk. One of the most common recommendations for supporting the biodiversity under climate change has been improving connectivity so that species can move and shift ranges. And this is a map that shows the current connectivity of natural habitats across Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota in the US. And this is really useful for conservation strategies like protection. It tells us where that habitat is, where it's currently connected, where we should make sure it stays that way. But you can also see there's a lot of this landscape, and a lot of the case in the upper Midwest, that is really fragmented. And really to improve connectivity or to even just maintain or recreate connectivity, restoration of habitat is really going to be pretty necessary. And restoration, for those of you who have done it or not done it, you may or may not know, restoring ecosystems is a very big investment of time and money. So these two pictures on the screen, this is pictures of a combine that's out doing a snow seeding for a grassland restoration. The one on the right is a combine harvest where they had collected seed that's going to go into that seeding for restoration. And that's not even all of the prep that went into the field to make sure it's ready for the seed, or the follow-up management that happens after the seeding takes place. There's a lot of time and energy that goes into putting these restorations and recreating this habitat on the ground. So we want to be able to do that in a way that sets it up well for the future, right? And success, and creates the outcomes and provides the benefits that we're trying to achieve with that restoration. So at the Nature Conservancy, we do a lot of ecosystem restoration. We do a lot of prairie restoration. We do a lot of reforestation, like you're seeing and planting of trees, you're seeing on this slide here. And there are many reasons to do that restoration. One of those is connectivity for wildlife or enlarging of habitat for populations. But there are many other things to consider so restorations can be resilient. And there are many other reasons to do it, particularly for like water or carbon or other types of reasons that we might be restoring or recreating natural habitat in our landscapes. And there are lots of things that we need to consider when we are doing these restorations. Some of those things are about how we do it. So how should we do the planting? When should we do the planting? What species should we put in that planting? Should we be augmenting or helping with assisted migration or assisted gene flow? So a lot of questions about how we do the restoration, but there are also a lot of questions about where we do the restoration as well. And that is really where the goal of this project was. The goal of this project was really to help us address that where question. And so my role as science director for the Nature Conservancy is really to help bring the science to our managers to help them make the best use of their limited time and money resources. And so that's what we were trying to do with this project, is think about how can we stack benefits and perhaps bring more funds to the table to help us do restoration for lots of different reasons that will benefit climate adaptation and connectivity, but maybe also lots of other things like water quality or carbon or pollinators at the same time. So today we're going to share the work we've done with this project through the lens of a couple of, well, 3 different sort of case studies, if you will, because one of the things we learned in this project is that we've generated a lot of data. We don't have time to cover all of the outcomes and possible uses for the data. But we wanted to do is like tell 3 different stories about how we would or use these data to help make more informed decisions around connectivity, climate adaptation, and ecosystem services in our restoration benefits. So we wanted, as I said, we wanted to make sure these results, my role is to make sure the science that I'm doing and the science I'm involved in is useful for our land managers. But we wanted to go beyond the Nature Conservancy's benefits here. And so we reached out and created an advisory committee for this project because we wanted to make sure whatever data we were generating was going to be useful to as many people involved in doing restoration in this region as possible. And we wanted to get their input on what are the types of restoration decisions they're making. How might they want to be using these data? How could we deliver these results in a way that would make it useful for them as well? So we had an advisory committee that over the course of the 2 years was a total of 33 different members from a lot of different entities. So we had 6 different tribal entities involved, people from 4 different states, different state agencies, federal agencies, other sort of collaborations like joint ventures, as well as academic institutions as well. So we had a pretty good variety of folks helping us sort of guide, like, how should we be delivering these results? What are the ways we should be doing this to make it useful to restoration practitioners on the ground? So I just want to say briefly before we dive into the stories we're going to tell you all today is that what we've generated in this project, one of the big things will be the data viewer. So all of these data will be put into a data viewer. They are in a data viewer. We won't have that exactly ready to share with you today. We're still working on tweaks of attributing the data. But all of that data, these data that you see and the maps that you see will be available through this viewer and available for folks to use. That includes the connectivity data, the ecosystem service data, some climate exposure data, as well as some kind of integrated project integration of those projects and overlap products and overlap of those things as well as the final report kind of detailing all of the methods, right? How did we get there? What's behind all of these data? And then working on publication of these case studies as well. So that will be the sum total of our final products. But what we're going to do today is share with you 3 different stories from the data. And so, which kind of happen at different scales. And the first one we want to share with you is this kind of regional scale restoration opportunity area that wasn't necessarily on our brain when we first started this project, but then became very clear with our steering committee that this was something that would be useful for folks, is to understand not just like exactly which parcel should you restore, but kind of where should you even target restoration to begin with? Where's kind of like that Goldilocks place, because you need some habitat to be able to connect, but not so much habitat that it's already connected and restoration isn't going to help you. So where are those kind of ideal places where restoration is going to be a key strategy for conservation? And then we want to talk about a little bit specifically just about the ecosystem service data. And like, we are often coming at this from the climate adaptation and the wildlife framework, but what if you lead with ecosystem services? What does that look like? And what the importance of those data to this process? And then finally, kind of really zoom into a particular landscape and talk about kind of on the ground, where should you restore an actual parcel to have the greatest benefit in a landscape for connectivity, and then the co-benefits that come along with that. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Kim to tell our first story at this kind of regional level opportunity area.
Okay. Thanks, Marissa. Thanks everyone for coming. I'll go ahead and have you go to the next slide, please. So as Marissa mentioned, we have a lot of different data sets that are products from this. So I wanted to just start out by showing you the first one, which is our region-wide categorical maps of connectivity. So on the left, you'll see we have one specifically parameterized for connectivity of prairies, and on the right, one that is parameterized for forests. So this is a little bit different than the map that Marissa showed you at the beginning, which I believe was all natural systems combined together. In this process, that was one of the first things that we wanted to dig into and then start figuring out how to operationalize using these different patterns that are basically biome specific. And just to say that this was a really big lesson that we learned from producing the original ones that were based on naturalness, that when people really want to dig into questions of restoration, it's not super helpful to have a map that allows connectivity to flow from one major biome to another. So just to start there. Next slide, please. So just to give you a little bit of context for looking at and interpreting the maps that we're going to show. And if anybody is really interested in this, please email me and I'll stick my email in later because I could talk about it all day, but no one wants me to. These are all based on wall-to-wall circuitscape. So that's a way of deploying the circuit theory-based tool circuitscape basically to just have current flow across landscapes. And the way we do that is have it go west to east, east to west, north to south, south to north, and sum them together. And basically you're capturing kind of movement in all directions with this approach. And what kind of the baseline product for that would be if you had a system that was not modified by habitat loss and conversion, you would basically have a surface that we think of as a current flow surface, where you would basically have flow again moving in all of those different directions that I described without any strong patterns in where it would go. And what circuit theory allows you to do is then explore patterns by changing the resistance of the different land cover types on your landscape. So if you're trying to understand the effect of human modification, you're assigning those places that are modified a higher resistance. Then when that current flow crosses the landscape, it's responding to those patterns of higher resistance areas by accumulating in places with lower resistance. So you'll hear us talking about resistance and current flow and those kinds of things. And really what we're doing is trying to figure out where are the places that that current flow ends up as a result of these human modifications that have happened on the landscape. And the places where you have high amounts of current are basically telling you that you've got a lot of habitat nearby, but then something has happened to constrain where that current can go. And that's suggesting you have some form of movement limitation. And that's what we're trying to address with this restoration work. Finding those places where that movement potential has been constrained and then figuring out how to sort of loosen up those constraints and allow more movement to happen. Okay, next slide, please. So when you look at these maps, the colors basically are describing three different types of patterns on the landscape. And those are shown over in the legend, but then also color coded on the right. And so this is, again, just the map of the prairies. And we have some places, mostly over in Nebraska, the western part of the region that's shown in the map there, where you've got highly intact systems. So lots of options for how movement can flow across that area. We call those diffuse flow zones. So you can sort of think of these little automated walkers are diffusing across the landscape because there's not any areas of high resistance. Again, those would be areas that have been converted to another land cover type that are constraining where they can move. If you look at the state of Minnesota, which we're going to zoom into in a minute, there's not a lot of that diffuse flow happening just because, again, of high rates of conversion. So the next category I'll talk about are the white and gray areas. Those are the places where you've got the least current flow on the landscape. And here we're mostly talking about intensive agriculture. And in the case of this prairie-based map, also places with lots of forest. So you've got two different drivers of that low connectivity for prairies. What we're really focusing in here again on the restoration point is these places that we call concentrated flow areas. So again, these are the places that current has been kind of pushed into due to high resistances in other areas. So they're indicating, again, this is where we're suggesting that movement will occur if it happens in that place. And we want to basically be able to broaden that movement pathway out and strengthen it and find places where current is getting pushed through habitats that might not be as suitable as we'd like them to be. So in this case, we're talking about um, these resistances are basically pushing current into places like row crop agriculture that we could improve, and again, improve the potential that species will be able to move through those places. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're going to focus in on an example in Minnesota. So just to zoom that previous map, next slide. And this is really just meant to be an example of how to use these data. And we put our talk together in stories because I think a lot of times when data from a project like this are delivered, you get maybe a set of data sets on their own, or you get something that is a much more finalized and polished analysis where there were a lot of different decisions and analytical steps that may or may not have been co-developed, but you get kind of a like, here's where you work answer. What we were trying to do with these case study examples is to kind of get to a point that allows more iteration with our group of advisors. So like integrate pieces enough that you can basically have a meeting and choose some of the rules and see what happens when you apply them. So that's the spirit of what I'm going to show you. So the question that we're trying to answer here is, say you're one of the folks that's responsible for either designing or potentially implementing restoration that would help support the goals of the Minnesota Prairie Conservation Plan. And that plan shapefile basically is shown in the blues and yellows and greens that are now overlaying over that prairie connectivity layer. And the question that we're trying to answer through this iterative process is, which additional roughly township-sized areas could we invest in to benefit prairie biodiversity and connectivity through restoration? So again, specifically creating a tool for exploring the potential for restoration to help benefit the goals of this project, of this conservation plan. Next slide, please. And just to make a point about this, this was a really intentional part of the work, is basically having to figure out an analysis scale and a set of assumptions that all of our project team members would follow as we develop the different data sets that we want to be able to use together to address different kinds of questions. So we had connectivity data and ecosystem services data. And it was really important that we all agreed on, a few things so that we could produce data that would play together. One of these is this large analysis scale window. You'll see another one later in the slides for the ecosystem services. But overall, this unit that we're talking about is about 22,000 acres, uniform in size, and it integrates this smaller 800-meter grid under which we're basically summarizing things like how much restorable agriculture are in these different units. And the idea here is not that we're expecting someone to pick a 22,000 acre block and go restore the whole thing. The idea is to help target where on the landscape we think that there are a lot of great opportunities to find these restorable areas that would benefit connectivity. So this might be where we send our field staff out to talk to farmers or do that kind of outreach to really explore those opportunities further. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to show you is what I sort of think of as an opportunity detector. Again, an iterative step in allowing people to kind of play around with these data and understand where they might start looking for great investments. What this is basically doing is integrating two pieces of information that we think people might find to be important when they are trying to choose where to do restoration for prairies that would benefit this Minnesota Prairie Conservation Plan. So on the y-axis there, shown in the shades of blue, we are basically summing the amount of agricultural land that has high potential, if restored, to improve prairie connectivity. And this is basically the concentrated flow from our wall-to-wall circuitscape model. So the places where current flow has been constrained by loss of habitat in neighboring places. How many acres of that do we have in these different spatial units? Then across the x-axis, we have the amount of prairie grassland in those same units. And this is basically trying to value places where you have prairie already that would benefit locally, from higher connectivity. You don't want to just have concentrated flow with nothing for it to attach to, um, in terms of trying to understand where you could work for the most benefit. Next slide, please. And just to say, like, this is something that we started off calling as Goldilocks places, just kind of our own intuition that these were the kinds of things that we were trying to find on the landscape. And the idea of this opportunity detector is just a way to operationalize that in a fairly simple way. And you can make whatever rules you want in terms of deciding where those thresholds are between low, medium, and high. And I'll just show you a couple of examples. But just to note that there is kind of a push and pull that's happening within this process, in that if you have a highly intact area, which might give you the top category on the amount of prairie category in the red, you're not going to have much concentrated flow. So those would be typically the diffuse flow areas. So you basically, this is a way of kind of getting you into those zones where it's not so fragmented, um, that you don't have connectivity there to work with, but it's not so intact that you don't need to improve the connectivity. Next slide, please. So again, this is where we were starting with, again, looking at the overlay of the prairie plan with the connectivity data. Next slide. And then one thing that folks might be thinking about as they think about expanding this network is, what are the impacts of climate change? And how can we develop or maybe expand our network to more effectively capture a range of different exposures to climate change? Like, for example, here I've just overlaid that same plan with projected changes in temperature from the current average to the mid-century, with a kind of moderate uh, intensity of change. And these details are going to be in the viewer when we release that. But just to say that you can see that with this really strong north-south gradient and how the plan is oriented, you're capturing potentially quite a bit of that temperature gradient across the state. But next slide. Doing a less effective job, I guess, of capturing the gradient east to west that describes the pattern of potential increases in drought risk, here as indicated by the change in climatic moisture index. This is just a super simple example of ways that you could bring in climate data through this approach, just to say, okay, maybe we really want to think about how to capture some of that east-west gradient in terms of moisture availability, especially as those factors change over time as climate continues to change. Next slide, please. So here's the results for the first part of the filtering process, where we're highlighting the places where you have the highest amount of grassland per cube. So the darkest red areas have the most grassland remaining. And again, this has to be also in places where you have opportunities for restoration. So there's a couple criteria that are happening here at the same time. Next slide, please. And then here we have, sorry, that one was just, sorry, that one was just area. This one has the restoration opportunities. And those restoration opportunities, again, defined by the amount of concentrated flow. That concentrated flow has to occur over agriculture, because that's what we would be talking about trying to change in terms of being able to spread out the amount of area that is available for movement. Next slide. So this is the part where we're putting the two pieces together. And then those top corner areas in that maroon color are basically the ones that are highest in both of the different criteria. So those are kind of your sweet spot for where to work. Next slide. And then just again overlaying that with the prairie plan. And next slide, please. You'll see that it's a little bit hard to see, but the top squares have now been highlighted with a black outline, and just putting those over the different, the original connectivity layer. So this is a pretty narrowly defined set of rules that I have deployed in this first one. You'll see it doesn't give you a ton of options within the state of Minnesota to work with, but it does give you a few, and those are a little bit over to the east, so you might be capturing some of those places with higher soil moisture. But if you don't think that gives you enough options, you can always change the criteria and loosen up where those thresholds are between the different boxes. So next slide. Here's an example of just doing that and basically saying, we're going to change our criteria a bit. We're going to lower our threshold in terms of how high the concentrated flow has to be. We're going to lower our threshold in terms of how strongly we're defining the grassland quality metric, something like that. Just to say this is a way of starting to bring that opportunity to people. You can have a conversation about where you want those lines to be, and then look at the products and overlay them with other data sets. I think that's all I've got.
Yeah.
Back to you, Marissa.
All right. So this is our Goldilocks scenario. How do we target restoration for, it's not so connected that restoration is not going to be helpful, but there's not so little of it left that restoration is not going to be helpful. Where is that ideal place where restoration will have the greatest benefit for reconnecting habitat? But we also, I talked in the beginning about how we have lots of different reasons for doing restoration. And one of our goals was to try to bring more of those diverse reasons to the table and together to try to stack some of those benefits. So wanted to share with you a little bit about the ecosystem service data that we also generated to put alongside all of this information. So I'm not going to spend very much time talking about the details of the ecosystem service modeling. All I want to say is Kim mentioned that we were talking at that larger level about these township-like boxes at 22,000 acres. But within that, we really is the level at which we did some of our smaller landscape modeling for connectivity and also the ecosystem services. So the ecosystem service data were generated, summarized basically at an 800 meter by 800 meter box, which is essentially 160 acres. For those of you familiar with our land survey system, that's about a quarter section. So essentially we summarized, we took the data, and the data are actually the raw data themselves exist at a 30-meter resolution. And we basically, because we were looking for areas that were restoration, we only summarized the data for places that within that 160-acre box, there was at least 50% agriculture. So if it had 50% agriculture, the ecosystem services were modeled using the data at 30-meter scale, and then summarized to the level of these 160-acre sort of parcels. I may use the word parcel. These are not, just because it's easier, these are not like official sort of ownership parcels, but essentially meant to equate to that. And so then what we did was we put that grid of 160-acre boxes across this entire area. And this map is really just meant to show you the scope at which we did that calculation for the ecosystem services. So any 160-acre box that had 50%, at least 50% cover of agriculture in terms of land cover, we calculated the baseline for ecosystem services. So that was for things like pollination or wild bee habitat. That was, how much habitat is there. For things like the water, it was more like disservice in a way, like how much export is happening for nitrogen from those areas due to the ag fields. And then we also calculated the marginal value, which was what if you restored that 160-acre parcel? How much value would you get for each of those ecosystem services in that spot? So if you just zoom in, like I said, the previous map shows you the scope at which we did the data exist at. But if you kind of just zoom into Minnesota to look at some of these patterns, you can see these are the 4 that we have here. So there's a wild bee habitat baseline. We looked at nitrogen export, phosphorus export, as well as sediment export. So which are kind of proxies, or maybe not even proxies, but factors that come into play with water quality, right? So thinking about benefits to water. And then here is the marginal value. So what if we took all of the ag in each of those parcels and converted it to, in this case, grassland? How much benefit would you get? And so then you can sort of see those patterns across the landscape. So what if you wanted to, instead of leading with connectivity, what if you wanted to lead with water benefits? Where would these data show you where you should be targeting for restoration of grassland habitat? And very clearly, if you look at the big picture, there are a lot of benefits in Iowa, as you can imagine, as there are a lot of export happening in those places too. And then the idea is that ultimately we're going to put these things together, right? So we can look at stacked benefits side by side to say how much. So for instance, this is that same map, that last map that Kim showed you, where with the expanded set of opportunity areas. Each of these boxes was a township and said, hey, this has a good, it's sort of the just right amount of habitat, both ag and grassland exists, that restoration could be beneficial. And then if we are able to when we put the ecosystem services underneath that, so this is looking at those same boxes overlaid with the sediment, you could say, all right, well, we know all of these places have some benefit for connectivity. Which of these places would have the greatest benefit for sediment retention? And so that we could use two of those dimensions to start targeting where you might want to be restoring habitat to make the most out of your restoration dollars. So you can see that would definitely start pointing you into southern parts of Minnesota and Iowa here. So that was a very quick ecosystem service story. And I have one more quick story we want to tell you, and then we want to open it up for questions, because as hopefully you're starting to get the picture, is there's a lot of data here with a lot of stories you can tell, and we cannot tell all of them. So we wanted to tell just a few to give you a flavor, and then answer your questions that you might have for us. So the last one I want to share is really zooming into a particular landscape. So, and looking at the Root River watershed. So this is a watershed in southeast Minnesota. It is very diverse. It includes both, well, a lot of agriculture, but also a lot of grassland and forest in the landscape. And actually the Nature Conservancy, we work in this landscape on both grassland restoration and reforestation. And so we thought, well, this might be an interesting case to look at, like, all right, we're out there doing reforestation or we're out there doing grassland restoration. How do you know what's going to be beneficial where? And then what are the additional co-benefits you might get alongside doing these types of restoration? So we asked the question first from the forest perspective, and we said, where will forest restoration have the most benefit for connectivity without negatively impacting our grassland connectivity within this landscape? So this is what the current land use looks like in the Root River watershed. So all of that brown is ag, row crop agriculture. The yellow is kind of that grassland or hay pasture, and the green is forest. So you can see it's definitely a mixture of all three. If you've been in this landscape, you're probably very familiar with that. And then, as Kim mentioned, we ran connectivity models parameterized for both, right? Because what looks connected for a forest versus what looks connected for a grassland is quite different in the landscape. And so those resistance values look different. And so we parameterized the model and ran it separately for connectivity for forest, which is what you see on the left here, versus connectivity for grasslands, which is what you see on the right. And then this is just that reminding you that we did this. So this is the connectivity done at the same scale that we did the ecosystem services. So once again, that same grid of 160 acre sort of farms, if you will, and just looking at places that had at least 50% agriculture within those boxes. And basically for the connectivity, we would say, all right, we would change sort of the land cover of that value and then run it again and run the connectivity and say, what was the benefit of that parcel, and calculate the benefits of connectivity. So we had to run this model thousands of times, both on the forest side and the grassland side, to get these values for connectivity for both the prairie and the forest, which is why we could only do this scale at the smaller landscape level. So if you look at the land cover, here's some of the results from the forest analysis. So basically, these pink boxes are the 102 farms, or if you will, or parcels that really came out as the highest benefit to forest connectivity. So if you reforested these 102 farms, you would have the greatest benefit to improving connectivity for the forest habitat in this landscape. And then, but we said, all right, we want to make sure we're not going to do this in a way that is going to interfere with our grassland restoration. How do these same parcels score for grassland restoration? Well, these 28 parcels that are highlighted in blue here are ones that do come up as high for forest connectivity, but also come up as high for grassland connectivity. So these are places where we might be needing to start think about, all right, what is the context of this area? What might be the greatest benefit to the habitat, surrounding habitat? Is this parcel going to be better serve a grassland connectivity or forest connectivity? And how do we need to make those decisions? And can we bring the ecosystem service data in that might help us to decide also where to do some of these restorations or prioritize? So when you look at the ecosystem service benefits on top of this, basically sediment retention was the one that had the greatest variability across the landscape, where you could see some difference between parcels. Phosphorus kind of was generally medium to high across the landscape, as well as nitrogen retention, and similarly for the wild bee habitat, fairly high across at least the parcels that popped out as important for forest connectivity had pretty high co-benefits for those three services. But if you look at the sediment retention, so this is those same 102 parcels that were good for forest connectivity, but did not also get in the way of grassland connectivity, and how they would rank for sediment retention. And so you can see here, some of these parcels definitely have higher sediment retention benefits. And so maybe this is another way to help us tease apart where we might want to invest our resources in doing restoration. So not only would we get connectivity benefits for forest wildlife, but we would also get some pretty high sediment retention benefits and co-benefits as well. And so the Soil and Water Conservation District in the Root River is actually redoing their watershed plan right now. And so these are the types of data that we are hoping to basically share with the Soil and Water Conservation District and help them inform where they're starting to do practices. Their focus is on water, our focus is on wildlife. How can we come together and use our resources to mutual benefit? So if I could sum this up in one sentence, I would basically say diversifying our reasons for restoring our grasslands and forests will hopefully also just improve our outcomes and diversify our outcomes at that. So that's the ultimate goal for this, is helping to create and stack those benefits and help bring more resources to the table in more effective ways for all of the ecosystem restoration work that we need to be doing in this part of the world. So with that, I definitely want a big shout out to the Climate Adaptation Science Center for the funding for this project. We have so many people very excited about these data, including just me, but also all of the Nature Conservancy and many other partners as well. So we're super excited to be at the share out stage of this and for all of the stories and uses that are in store for these data. And hopefully we have time to answer some questions.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Marissa and Kim. Let me
I'll stop sharing. I have a very whiny dog who decided somewhere in the middle of this presentation that she really needs to go outside. So hopefully you can't hear that.
I just heard it for the first time.
Marissa, you don't hear dogs anymore.
Yeah.
Only you.
Filtering. She's just annoying me.
Great. All right. Well, thank you both. Really cool presentation. Feel free to add some questions into the chat here to get going. Or if you'd like to come off mute, please do. I'm going to kick us off with a question from Owen in the chat. Are there any plans to add in information about where grassland embedded wetlands are or could be restored to help inform joint wetland grassland restoration efforts? So kind of similar to the joint decision making that you were just discussing there.
Yeah, I just saw Kristen follow up. Good question, Owen. Not specific plans, although Kristen and I definitely have had lots of conversations about how we hope to use these data to summarize them in terms of how we can be using our grassland restoration for water, so a grass for water kind of benefits. But we haven't talked specifically about the wetland restoration piece, which is obviously a key component of some of those water ecosystem services. So yeah, I would love to chat, Owen, if you've got ideas about like if there's ways, like easy ways to take these data and kind of do some of that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, just to add in there, like we definitely have a lot of information, the same way that we have information on where concentrated flow goes across restorable agriculture. We have concentrated flow flowing along, especially riparian wetland systems. Like we can see wetlands that are in locations between grasslands that are playing really important roles for connectivity. That we could filter the data in the same way that we did for agriculture. We could just say like, where do we have wetlands that are in these places already? But we wouldn't have like the explicit translation, I guess, I'm not sure what I'm trying to say here, but there's a lot of information that we could understand as far as like where the wetlands are that are playing that really strong role in supporting the potential of movement across grassland systems.
I don't know if
Awesome,
you saw-
thanks.
Oh yeah, Owen gave you a big thumbs up there too, Marissa, as you were talking. So
Yeah, I saw. Yeah, we'll have to follow up.
awesome. I'll run to Christina's question next here. What tools did you use to identify the top 100 farms for restoration?
Yeah, I believe that was just the top quintile maybe of data. So essentially it was like, it's the top, I don't remember how many things Melissa split it into, but it's the top tier of connectivity values. So the places that were showing the greatest change in connectivity value when we kind of, we'd flip one and then you'd run it. And then you calculate the difference and you flip one and you run it and you calculate the difference. So it's like this change in how diffuse or concentrated you make that flow. And so you're looking for places that have the greatest change in how much spreads that concentrated flow out. So it's a measure of flow, and it's the parcels that had that greatest impact. I don't know if I explained that very well.
Yeah,
but
we actually did it at a couple of different scales, and basically exactly what Marissa was saying, like trying to figure out if concentrated flow is typically showing you the places where you have a really high value surrounded by lower values because the low values are occurring where you have higher resistances, and you're trying to kind of take the top off that peak and spread it out. So you're kind of looking at a neighborhood change in standard deviation.
Great, thanks. Can you, what model did you use then that you were running? Sorry, just to follow up. I was curious, like what platform or model
Yeah, it's
that
a
you're
wall-to-wall
using.
version of CircuitScape.
Okay, thanks.
sorry, that was an easier, I should have just said that.
No, no, it was helpful to hear how like the mechanistic part of it. So thank you. Yeah.
All right, Seth?
Yeah. Excuse me. First off, I guess it's really awesome to see all the stuff you guys are looking at and going to be putting out here in the short term. I was also just the other day reading through this forecasting hotspots of grassland suitability preprint that came out. And what struck me is that grasslands appear to be pretty stable, kind of, especially in Minnesota in that specific area and then moving north. But then we look at a lot of the connectivity mapping and stuff. What jumps out at me is that there are a lot of places where there is reasonably good connectivity ends up being along that ecotonal boundary between forests and grasslands. Given the fact that maybe grasslands under future climate conditions, at least looking up to 2050 or 60, looks comparatively stable. I'm just kind of curious about what happens if grassland habitat remains pretty stable in terms of its climatic niche, but at the same time, it is creating an avenue for forest species or woody species to kind of infiltrate. And I understand that, burning is a really good um, management strategy to prevent against that. But if there isn't enough forest to move to make grasslands want to shift, but there is enough kind of climatic niche forest to promote woody species, have you thought about that, or what are your kind of what's going through your mind?
Yeah, I mean, really good question. And I mean, in some ways, I feel like what you're sort of asking is connectivity goes both ways, right? There's maybe good things that happen with it and not so, I don't know, we say not so good. It's just things in terms, that's all depends on what you value, right? But lots of things move with connectivity, and it's not always just the things you want to move. Um, Definitely thought about that. I guess I would say at this point, we feel like our connectivity for our grasslands is so limited in places that it's important just to get it back there, even if, and I think woody encroachment is likely going to be happening either way. And so if we can at least get some of those species have a corridor to move. I mean, it also, yeah, woody encroachment is actually a whole other question we're dealing with and trying to address with our North Central Climate Adaptation Science Center project at the moment. So it's definitely a big issue, one we're thinking a lot about. But I don't know that not restoring habitat is going to keep woody encroachment from happening in our grasslands. So I guess I don't see that as a reason to not do the restorations. I mean, there are some questions about like, for sure, we're seeing woody encroachment already happening in our grasslands, but also the forest folks are very worried about their forests becoming grasslands. So there's some question about, long term with climate change, what does that prairie forest border even look like? And would we start to see a shift in another direction if soil moistures hit a particular sort of turning point? So I think there's a lot that we don't know. That's probably a very unsatisfying answer, Seth, but it's a good question.
And I guess you're absolutely right about, it is good to, try to enhance connectivity, but I guess maybe this is a bit outside, but what was fascinating about this paper is that, like, is there going to be enough climate stress in the next 30 years to actually drive significant movement in grasslands, considering this region is still predicted to be kind of a biodiversity hotspot or capable of sustaining complex mixtures of grasslands?
Oh, I guess I
Like,
see your
will they
question.
move in the
I
first
guess
place?
I don't know
Yeah.
the answer to that, but I would say even in the absence of the need to move for climate change, our grasslands are so fragmented. I think they have the need to move for just sustaining population viability currently, because they are isolated, fragmented populations that even just to sustain themselves currently probably could use some better connectivity, or at the very least some enlargement of populations to help even just to maintain. Sorry, wasn't following your question.
No, that was perfect.
Great. We've got a lot of terrific questions coming in here. Let's see. Nancy's question might be a little bit related to Seth's here. Have you worked with these analyses to identify connectivity for specific species or terrestrial versus flying species?
The short answer is no. As specific as we've gotten is biomes at this point, and I feel like it was a big step forward. Grassland connectivity compared to forest connectivity, which has been super useful, but we have not been able to dive into particular species. That would be really interesting.
And this is where you plug yourself for your next phase of funding. So
yes, that's the next comparison study.
Yeah, just to chime in there, I mean, I think the real superpower of these structural connectivity tools is sort of understanding how does the landscape provide adaptive capacity for various groups of species. And then there are other more species-specific animal movement methods that you can use in the same landscape to try to test different assumptions about how species might respond and, might change during fall migration versus spring migration. But these kind of can give you consistent picture of the whole landscape and really help you think about, really pervasive processes like land conversion and understanding how they're kind of shifting things in one direction or another, in addition to all of the other drivers that species are responding to.
Thanks. I'm seeing the nature of some of these questions have to do with, and what else do we get to do with this tool? So that is very exciting. For example, Bobby's question, if they wanted to get state level information similar to what you shared for Root River watershed, is that a possibility?
So we have the 800 by 800 meter data for ecosystem services, yes, at the state level. The connectivity data is only at the 800 change data for restoration for 2 different smaller landscapes, because that data that's the data that takes thousands and thousands of runs to do. So we're not able to do that at the state level, which is one of the other reasons we did the regional level kind of analysis of opportunity areas, to say like, all right, at the big scale, where would you just target? Where are places that you might want to start to zoom in and look at restoration as a pretty good strategy for connectivity. So we don't have I guess that's the short answer.
But there is still a lot that you can look at with the connectivity maps themselves without, pulling the pixel out and changing the land cover on it and seeing how much it changes. I mean, you can definitely learn a lot about how that result would be likely to compare relatively once you start looking at those maps quite a bit. And, the other thing that's kind of underlying this method is the assumptions that we made about what is restorable and sort of some minimum viable units and things like that. But those broad maps are really free of those specific restoration choice assumptions. And so for a starting place, we would be happy to, kind of help you understand how to apply those to a specific question.
Yeah, sure.
Great. Well, we are just about at the end of the hour here. I might ask Marissa and Kim if there's one of the remaining questions in the chat that you think is, you can answer in a couple minutes there. I'll defer to you on that. And we will also, to our attendees, we'll be popping up a poll momentarily at the end of the answer of the next question for you to let us know if this topic kind of achieved what you needed today, you learned some things. That is very helpful for us as we think about future topics for our programming. So please take 30 seconds to fill out that screen that pops up for you before you close out today. Kim and Marissa, what do you think?
Well, there's lots of great questions here. I'm sorry we didn't get to them all, but maybe Robert's question about reality testing of model outcomes. We have not done that yet. We've just done the modeling, but it would be, so connectivity in general, I feel like we could stand to have a lot more sort of ground truthing of these data in many different ways. I mean, whether that's like observing things moving, doing some landscape genetics. I mean, I feel like there are some big assumptions that we make in these data and in using these data that it would be really valuable to do some on the ground sort of evaluation of reality. So I love that suggestion. We have not done it, but I definitely think it would have value.
And I do think it just gives us a mechanism for coordinating things like camera trapping that folks are doing for, whatever reason in terms of looking at corridor use, and things like acoustic monitoring. The more we have a sort of baseline to test, the more we can work together to evaluate whether or not that makes any sense or not, or whether it needs to be tweaked.
Great. Thank you so much. We will forward those remaining questions in the chat over to our speakers. And if they have an opportunity to respond to those afterwards, we'll defer to them on that. Thank you so much, both Kim and Marissa, for your time today and presenting on this really cool project. We are also grateful for everyone who shared their lunch hour with us and for filling out that poll. So thank you very much. Have a great week and join us for our next seminar on May 18th.